This is Catherine Schneider from the Fitchburg Historical Society. This afternoon we are at Dunn's Marsh, and we have three important guests today who have been very involved in the restoration of Dunn's Marsh. And our guest today is Rick Eilertson, who was city engineer for the City of Fitchburg as this area was just being so well taken care of and restored. So Rick, my first question is, I'd like to know what your job at the City of Fitchburg was and kind of your time frame for being there and working with the plans for Dunn's Marsh water management for the City of Fitchburg.
Yeah, so I had a chance to serve the city as the environmental engineer from 2006, November of 2006, until I left in January of 2017, so a little over 10 years. You know, as the environmental engineer, when I was hired, half of my job was basically running the stormwater utility and half was the solid waste and recycling collection program. Later we were able to bring in sustainability initiatives, but here, you know, primarily working on understanding where stormwater ran off into the marsh, and some of the negative impacts prior to us being able to put in Apache Pond and other ponds in the area, and then identifying just different things that we could do, talking internally with staff and then externally with community members, both in Fitchburg and Madison that were part of the watershed, to bring up ideas and talk through, identify solutions, and then come up with grant funding to implement those solutions.
Great. Well, I'd like to find out more about Dunn's Marsh itself, because many people, I think, are not even aware of Dunn's Marsh. So maybe if you could give us some background on its location, its size, some of its characteristics, how it got here. Can you fill us in on Dunn's Marsh?
Yeah,
Introduce us to Dunn's Marsh.
Probably the best thing is we can take a look at the map that Shawn's holding over there. And just because I've basically got a in 2013. So this map we prepared after we'd already put Apache Pond in, but it does a nice job of showing the watershed. So basically we're right here at the north end of Dunn's Marsh. So Dunn's Marsh is this. So originally, I kind of back in history a little bit, when Home Depot is right here. So that's actually now in the Dunn's Marsh watershed. Originally, it was its own closed depression, and so water that was in this watershed drained down to the bottom and had to soak entirely into the ground before leaving. This is prior to the Home Depot in this area being developed. In order to develop this, the City of Madison had to find a way to take that water out so that it wasn't flooding, you know, on a regular basis, this lower area where the Home Depot is. So there was a deep tunnel storm system put in, roughly 30 feet deep, 72 inches diameter, so that's 6 feet diameter. I could walk without having to bend over in the bottom of that storm sewer. Basically goes right underneath the Allied Dunn's Marsh Boys and Girls Club, and then discharges right over underneath Crescent Road by the Renaissance area, into the northwest corner of Dunn's Marsh, and then flows into right behind us into the north section of Dunn's Marsh. So there's roughly what was originally the watershed for Dunn's Marsh was about 600 acres. Now through this map you can see, you know, with adding other previously closed watersheds into it, now in this 2013 version there's 1,400 acres that all drain into Dunn's Marsh. So there was no, in this northern area where development basically happened from the 1950s in this area, 1960s and 1970s in this area. That was at a time that there wasn't any treatment designed into the storm system. You can see these blue lines represent storm sewers. This area, when it was developed, basically everything was overland flow. So it was all curb and gutter. You know, 100% of that water that fell on the land drains into the curb and gutter and then was going down here. Before the pond was put in, it went directly into the marsh without any treatment. So when I first got here, this area was all covered in honeysuckle buckthorn where the pond is now, and then got to be cattails farther south in the wetter, lower areas. But a lot of trash because, again, anything and all the trash went right into here. Now at least the trash is caught by the pond and then city staff and actually residents that walk this area will pick trash up, either on the Earth Day cleanups or just when they're out walking around. So that trash and also the contaminants that previously were getting directly into the marsh aren't going there because of this pond being here. So I guess that's, there's also, development that happened in the city of Fitchburg in previously closed depressions that additional storm sewer basically drained that to the south portion of the marsh. And then since this map was put in, there's been additional development down by Sub-Zero in this area that's continued to add more water. At least in this area, there's a lot more stormwater facilities that provide both infiltration and detention that help to manage that to pre-existing, basically pre-settlement conditions, which really helps a lot. It's a lot less negative than it was with early development.
Mm-hmm. So a lot has been learned in the years since development started here.
Right, right.
So you've researched the developmental history, of course, of this area around Dunn's Marsh. And so the concerns then were with the runoff of the water. And I just would like to mention also the Arboretum, of course, is very close here too.
Right, right.
So that's another environmental area to be aware of.
Exactly. Yeah, so Catherine, you mentioned the Arboretum. So this is the Green Prairie portion of the Arboretum. One of the really interesting things about the Green Prairie, it was personally planted by Henry C. Green. He was a professor here on campus. While the Northern Prairie, John Curtis was involved with, was done by numerous volunteers with the CCC, students, and so forth. Henry actually wanted to have full control over the planting of the native plants. One of the interesting things that UW had talked about is that a lot of the native plants that Henry got from grabbing all around Wisconsin are still in the same location that they were planted by Henry way back in, it would have been 1940s, and what's really interesting. So there's clearly been a lot of studying of that. I've actually learned about native vegetation by taking tours from the volunteer naturalists. Usually once a week they've got tours that people can go to. Mary and others have gotten to know a lot about native vegetation and appreciate that, and then understand the benefits of utilizing native vegetation to help with stormwater runoff.
So they're very connected.
Very connected. Some of the other issues with the Arboretum from back in the 60s and 70s was concerned about water that was draining through the Arboretum. So they asked the city of Madison to run stormwater, move stormwater that was previously going through Arboretum here. So that pushed water over to this point. And then it still was creating a problem over here. So later, City of Madison then they were able to make a small pond right here. This would have been 2007, shortly after I started, and then directed that into the marsh, so provided some additional treatment. And then later decided that they really wanted to reduce this, as well. So we oftentimes will just say, hey, we don't want water to go here, so we design a way to push it somewhere else. And so one of the things that I think this project really does a nice job of explaining is treating it in place rather than pushing the problem onto a different location.
So treating it on site, where it's here.
Yeah.
Great. Could you describe for us, Rick, the problem with the stormwater sewer system that drained into the northern marsh?
Yeah. So I kind of alluded to it, bits and pieces of it earlier, but the biggest issue was water, in a relatively small pipe that was going directly into the marsh without any treatment. So some of the different contaminants that can be problematic are clearly trash, and you can see that visibly. But there's also sediment, and then there's phosphorus are the two primary other potential contaminants. And so that's one of the nice things about any type of bioretention facility. So the upper areas are actually providing some amount of bioretention. The wet pond is providing sediment control, where water basically has to flow through, the stormwater has to flow through the water column, and that is allowed to settle that sediment out. And then, if and when the pond needs to be dredged, the city is able to take equipment in either hydraulically or mechanically, and then remove that sediment to allow for future sediment to accumulate, and then basically provide that treatment downstream. So it's improving the water quality, but also improving the water quantity, or, basically, having a place for that water to stay shortly, basically detain it on site, so there's not this huge influx, basically huge peak flow that's going, directly into the marsh. So that really helps to preserve the marsh as well.
And hence the name detention pond.
Right,
It's very
exactly.
well named,
Yep,
isn't it?
You're right.
Well, what proposals to alleviate the stormwater problem then were brought forth, and there were also hurdles to overcome, I know, in the proposals that were made. And could you describe that situation?
Yeah, so in 1994, the City of Madison and City of Fitchburg worked together on basically identifying potential solutions to that. And so these actually weren't thought of as potential solutions at that time, but there was a potential to put a large detention basin where the Renaissance development is. Ultimately, the City of Madison, they didn't have funding that they were able to provide for that, and neither did the City of Fitchburg. So we were able to make a small detention area, and then because of failures to that detention pond, have made improvements to basically stabilize the outflow, replace the berm numerous times when it's failed, and then added in some low bioretention areas to help at least take some of that water and then infiltrate it into the ground.
And I guess we should also mention the cooperation between the City of Fitchburg and the City of Madison,
right,
because Dunn's Marsh is owned by the City of Madison, isn't it?
Correct, yeah. So Dunn's Marsh was actually purchased by the City of Madison, I believe in 1971, for about, I think it was about $27,000. So about $500 an acre, because it's roughly 50, 60 acres of that parcel. It's in the City of Fitchburg limits, but owned by the City of Madison. It's kind of interesting going back into the archives through UW-Madison. At different times, the Arboretum/UW-Madison were interested in acquiring the marsh for preservation. Ultimately, the City of Madison ended up buying it, and then there's been some collaboration, some apprehension on different parts, but it's obviously owned by who it's owned by now, and while I was at Fitchburg, I had a chance to work with Russ Hefty and others at the City of Madison on just trying to identify different things that they could or should do with the property that they owned as well.
Okay, great. And so eventually what we have today is here,
right,
and all the work and cooperation among the city government officials, the neighborhood, and people who are interested in the environment and the pond all came together to make it this beautiful area that we have now.
Right, right. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the concept of the Apache Pond, and the naming of it and so forth. So probably around 2009, I was looking at different things that could be done, throughout the city-owned areas. What was interesting about Apache Pond is that it was owned by, even though the Dunn's Marsh Neighborhood Association, City of Madison, Town of Fitchburg at the time, all worked together to purchase this. These were two developable lots, so lots 19 and 20, I think, Mary. That was planned to have a development much like the condos just down the street, and those got put in. That really mobilized the neighbors, with concerns about, they were having stormwater problems immediately right as they put the apartments in, because it's right at the foot of Red Arrow Trail, and there was just a 30-inch diameter pipe that had to take all that stormwater. The parking lot was above the roadway, and so basically water would flow, into the basement before it would flow around it, and so a lot of issues that way. This, fortunately, with the work that Mary and Dave Martin and numerous other City of Fitchburg and City of Madison residents had worked together to identify that there are wetlands on this property, that it couldn't be developed, that it shouldn't be developed for apartments. That basically was able to get this into public ownership. When I looked at the property, it was owned by Dane County at the time, and there was a mattress, in here, all kinds of, honeysuckle, buckthorn. I didn't know if somebody was living here, on the property or not, but I took the photos in to Dane County and said, hey, this is a land that I'm seeing is your ownership. Is this something that you want to to keep in your ownership? And if so, do you have plans on what you want to do with it? Because I've got an idea that we can make a pond in the non-wetland portion of it, basically help to alleviate some of the hydrologic stresses, to the northern portion of the marsh. And they said, Rick, yeah, you go ahead and do. So I actually wrote a grant application to DNR, about $150,000, both to acquire the land and to work on building the facilities. So we've got a wet detention pond here. We've got a rain garden that we named after David Martin on the other side. We've got a berm through here, and because I had to do a berm here anyway, we figured it's good to make this a walkable surface, add sidewalk along the south side of Crescent Road so that people can actually come and enjoy this and have this be seen as an asset. So we were able to get $150,000 in DNR funding for construction of the pond. We also got $25,000 in funding from DNR that covered the public information signage. So we've got 3 signs here that help the residents, anybody that's using the facility, to understand what we did, why we did it. And then we also got funding from Dane County through the Urban Stormwater Quality Grant that Dane County has, so that 100% of the funding for this installation was paid for by DNR and Dane County funding. City of Madison didn't need to pay for it. City of Fitchburg, ultimately, they paid for it but got reimbursed through the other grants that we had available.
Wonderful that you were able to do all that, find those sources of income for having the project go forward, and see what we have here today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, sitting beside me this afternoon is Mary Mullen, who has been just such an important part of the Dunn's Marsh Neighborhood Association. And Mary, I'd like you to maybe explain your interest in Dunn's Marsh and what role you've played in the Dunn's Marsh Neighborhood Association.
Well, I have to really go back to my childhood when I talk about being interested in Dunn's Marsh, because I grew up in southwestern Wisconsin, beautiful place, the driftless area of Wisconsin, hills, rivers, everything. And when we were kids, we would, I lived in Wazeeka, Wisconsin, which is where the Kickapoo River flows into the Wisconsin River. And it's a very twisty river. We were in the valley where the river flows into the Wisconsin River, but we could walk up over the hill about a mile over gravel roads and then farm fields and get onto what we called the North Side Hill and look down on the Kickapoo River there. And there were limestone, shelters there, caves, and so we enjoyed that. And then some other times what we would do is we would walk to Woodman over the railroad tracks, and it went over the Wisconsin River, and there was a 723 tie trestle that went over the river, and we walked that 4 miles there and 4 miles back. And then we also had Wyalusing State Park near Prairie du Chien, and that overlooks a very tall hill, overlooks the confluence of the Wisconsin River with the Mississippi River. So I credit that with my having an interest in nature to start with. Well, when I moved here after college, 1963, I moved here into this part of the neighborhood. I graduated in 62 and lived elsewhere. But my husband and I would walk around the neighborhood. Well, this was not developed in any way. We lived on Windflower Way, and just one door from us was the electric research farm. 145 acres. It had cows and demonstrated uses of electricity to people from all over the world who would come visit, not just Wisconsin people. This was right after World War II. It was developed because they wanted to show the uses of electricity on the farm. But when I moved there, it was winding down. The whole countryside had been electrified already. But Meanwhile, I had gotten a chance to enjoy Dunn's Marsh just by walking down here. Also, I belonged to the League of Women Voters. I had joined it, and I learned from them about environmental protection and about how to talk about issues and how to lobby about issues and so on. And the main way I got interested about protecting Dunn's Marsh was in 1971. Crescent Road, where we're right along right now, had the Parade of Homes in 1970, and then a lot of people moved in and they were told, nothing's going to be built in front of you, don't worry. Well, they didn't realize that it was zoned R4, which means apartments, multifamily. And when the bulldozers pulled in front of their houses, they were shocked and then angry, and they did everything they could to stop them, but there was no way. They even annexed to the city of Madison for a while, and then there was a de-annexation fight, and they came back into Fitchburg. So
a lot of
they
drama.
reached out, yeah, and they reached out. They could see the marsh, and the people above them could see the marsh, but they reached out beyond there. I live on Milford Road. There's no way I can see the marsh because, it's not high enough, and there are lots of things in front of us. So that was an educational experience as well. Okay, so this fight over the apartments was in 1971. In 1972, there were two people running for local office, Roy Waldron running to be our alder in the city of Madison, and Dick Ganold, who was running for county board to represent this area. And they suggested, you should form a homeowners association and support us. Well, I've been in the League of Women and Voters, and I know you don't hitch your star to a political person. What you do is you think about the issues. But we thought it was a good idea to have a neighborhood association, but we thought it was not right to just consider homeowners important. Everybody's important, that's what we thought. So any resident of the neighborhood, renter, whatever, could join. So 4 of us got together, 4 of us women, and we set the borders, which was Seminole Highway, the Beltline, Verona Road, and the Marsh. And we suggested a name. We were going to call ourselves Dunn's Marsh South Beltline Neighborhood Association, but we soon dropped the South Beltline because that was just too long. And we decided to be independent of politicians so we could lobby them to do what we needed to do. And then another thing we decided to do was to publish a neighborhood newsletter on a monthly basis. It was a paper newsletter, and we delivered it to all 1,300 homes and apartments in the neighborhood. And one of the things that was important from our day one of organizing, we had started the association on Valentine's Day in 1973, was to talk about the marsh. Because of course in our minds was this struggle to buy, to get those apartments stopped. And this area that we're here right now, which is lots 19 and 20, was also zoned for apartments. It was like a 7-year struggle. Finally purchased in 1979, and it was purchased with 50% federal funds, federal and state funds, and then the other 50% came from the city of Madison, the town of Fitchburg then, the county, and then we had raised some money here, about $2,700. So that all went into buying these lots, which were marshland basically, for about $75,000.
Oh.
Okay, so this is getting long. I'll say then we also struggled to get Marlboro Park because we'd only had rented parks in the neighborhood. And it took us a number of years, but we got about a 20-acre park up there. And so I was a president of the association for the first 2 years, and then of the first 16 years of the association, I was on the council, including that first 2 years I was the president. And when I was done with that, I thought, we've published this newsletter, we've had all these great articles about the environment and all our struggles to do this and that. We need to have something permanent. And besides, people were moving in and out all the time, and they didn't know anything about the neighborhood. So I applied for a grant from the Dane County Cultural Affairs Commission, and I made the grant, And this is a book that came out of it. It's about 200 and some pages, 235 pages.
And you are the author, Mary, is that correct?
I'm the editor. Well, I'm the author of a lot of it, you know, because I looked up, I researched, you know, from the time that this was surveyed by the state of Wisconsin in, well, before it was a state, it was in 1836. And the state, we didn't become a state till 1940, or 1848. So this is a book in which I detail, you know, a lot of articles. I engaged some other people who'd been involved in writing articles, and they helped me choose the articles. And, you know, with this other stuff I researched, that's the book. So that came out in 1990. And I moved out of the neighborhood in 1997, and then the neighborhood association didn't renew itself, and it fell apart for a while. We say it went into hibernation. And I came back, and then I moved back in 2001, and people were saying to me, you know, why don't we revive the association? And I was saying, oh, I know what work it is. I don't really want to do that. But the association managed the Marlboro Community Garden, which I had started in 1970. And here it was 2001, and we were still managing that garden. But in 2005, the City of Madison decided that every community garden should be done the same, should have the same fees, and it's not only to have gardens, but it's to develop community leaders. Well, that had never been our goal. Our goal was just to give everybody a chance to garden. And they took the lease away from the association and gave it to the Community Action Coalition, I think, maybe, of South Central Wisconsin. And we couldn't prevent anything like that. And they had these huge fees and wanted us to have meetings every month, and, you know, it seemed like a lot of work to us. So then we decided, you know, the people that had been trying to dicker with the city about the garden, we really needed an ongoing association. So in 2006, in April, we started up the association again. And again, I was on the council for a number of years, and that phase of it lasted through till early 2018. And now it's in eclipse again. But at that time, we could have an email newsletter. So I did that. You know, I was an English major. I loved to write, and I loved to take pictures. So we had a lot of pictures. It was much longer than a little 4-page thing. And, you know, it would be in the newsletter, both the paper one and the one that we did later, that we would talk about the marsh. We would have articles by various people. We would have meetings like Rick would be talking about the marsh and invite everybody.
And I understand also, if I can interject, that you had some expertise from Jim Zimmerman from the university.
Yes, and
in fact, the bench here is dedicated to him. Can you describe his role in the Dunn's Marsh?
Right. This says, in memory of Dr. James H. Zimmerman, 1924 to 1992, who helped teach us the importance of preserving Dunn's Marsh. Well, he did that soon after we first organized the association in 1973. I'm sure it was in 1973 that he came to our council meeting, and he talked about the marsh and how it was important, what marshes do. You know, they filter out pollutants, and they keep flooding from happening, and they, you know, of course, provide wildlife habitat. And his idea was that this runoff from all this new development that was going to be happening, already was happening, should not even go into the marsh at all. It should be piped away from it or past it. Well, that never happened, but, you know, what we've had now, you know, is the ponds that slow things down and collect the sediment, and then we can pick up the trash, you know, before it gets into the marsh. But he gave us a good education on the council. And we also had people who had been involved in that controversy. You know, we had David Martin, who's mentioned over there. We had Ron Johnson. We had a young man called Ron Christie, who was going to the university about landscape architecture, and then we had, you know, many other people who would go to many meetings, many meetings, you know, And we just researched things, things completely. We talked to all our representatives. We went to their committee meetings. We went to the town board meetings. We went to the city council meetings, and that's what we did.
Very active, and it took a lot of hours and energy put into it, Mary. So you were doing a great deal of advocacy for restoring and preserving the marsh through these years. I have a question I really think is important in terms of advocacy, and that is, what motivates you to be such a passionate advocate for Dunn's Marsh?
Well, as I told you, I had this good experience as a young child and through my high school years in Wazeeka of appreciating nature. So appreciating nature is the first thing. And it's being able to go through it and enjoy it and see nature, not see just concrete and houses and things like that. So that's the first thing. And then, seeing a place like those apartments built myself, seeing that part of the marsh disappearing is another thing. And then, having walked over this, and you used to be able to, from my house on Milford Road, you'd walk down over here and there'd be a big hill and you'd look down on the marsh and it was a sleigh riding hill. Well, then they built Crescent Road, and you couldn't sleigh ride there anymore because you'd run right into the road, and there was a curve there and you couldn't tell whether anybody was coming. So seeing things disappear, appreciating things, and then seeing things disappear, and then learning how to advocate. I think those are the things that give me the passion. But I think, people in general need this. They need it for their mental health, for their physical health, and, just to enjoy visually as well. So I guess that's it.
Thank you, Mary. It's beautifully said. We have Shawn Pfaff with us this afternoon, former mayor of Fitchburg, and he's going to fill us in on the political aspects of Dunn's Marsh and its restoration. So Shawn, first question I want to ask you is, what was your introduction to the environmental concerns here at Dunn's Marsh?
Well, thank you for having me. I know you've talked to some great people today about this project. It was really an eye-opening experience for me as someone who got to know Fitchburg a lot when I moved here, but as mayor, it was one of the first things I really got to know, intricately involved with, was this Dunn's Marsh area, just the natural beauty of it, but also the geographic location. I mean, we literally stand today halfway between Epic and downtown Madison, so the growth and the people that come to this area. But people come to Fitchburg because of access to the university, our quality of life, but also our environment. And so the question was for us at City Hall at the time, what were we going to do to recharge this beautiful area? An area that had such deep pride, and as you heard from some of your earlier guests today, how impactful this neighborhood is to our community, to our economy, but also this destination of Dunn's Marsh. So I just felt, led by staff, former staff Rick Eilertson, city engineer, it was a right opportunity to get in here and clean this area up. And plus, it's so closely connected to the bike trails and the number of people that want to see this area really recharged and reclaimed. And that was what brought me to the attention of mine. And I was very blown away when I first saw it.
Recharged and reclaimed, what good words to use.
Thank you.
So as mayor, what was your part in handling the challenges of the stormwater-related environmental damage that had been done here at Dunn's Marsh?
Sure. So Fitchburg, has always had for years this deep commitment to sustainability and what we give back. And we can grow. It's how we grow our community, because there's no doubt, as I said, our geographic location, growth is going to occur. But when you do growth, what do you do and what do you leave behind, and what will the future be? And the neighborhood you see here, Belmar, is a wonderful neighborhood, connects to a great neighborhood just south of the Beltline in Madison, and you talked to that longtime neighborhood leader, Mary. And what I tried to do was to listen, first of all, to say, if we're going to grow in other parts of the city, Shawn, make sure you take care of those existing neighborhoods. What does that mean? That means that we have to make sure that the environmental quality stands. It stands the test of time. And where we're located, the water runoff from the belt line, the topographical area where water comes into this area, it really meant that I had to demonstrate to the community that we could walk and chew gum. We could grow, and we could grow in great neighborhoods. And at the time, I lived in a very new neighborhood of Swan Creek, which is over on the eastern side of the city. Wonderful neighborhood, very environmentally sensitive. But it was a new neighborhood. And residents, especially in this area, longtime Fitchburg residents, been here for 50, 60 years, said, well, what are you going to do in our neighborhood? And it was really impressive. And political pressure does work. And elected leaders do listen. And I actually listened. I'm proud of myself that I did. And so we got in here, and I was lucky to have Rick, our city engineer, one of our city engineers at the time, really kind of help lead the efforts here. And as he probably explained to you, all the money that came in from DNR and the state and the city. So it wasn't just Fitchburg laying out this huge fiscal cost. We had partners in here. But we also had people that wanted to follow our lead. And what we did here was going to make an impact of how other water quality mitigation occurred around our south central Wisconsin area.
Mm-hmm. So being a leader in terms of this water management.
I would agree, yes.
So the Neighborhood Association, Dunn's Marsh Neighborhood Association, obviously brought their concerns forward. And how did you respond to them?
Well, I appreciated that. I had not known Mary Mullen and her people. And I was, I say this very respectfully. I'm like, okay, they live in Madison. They're not direct Fitchburg residents. But then I could kind of step back and said, you know what, we're all connected. It all matters. Yes, there's one jurisdictional line that happens to be 150 yards up the road here. But Mary cared about this area just as much as I did, even though she lived outside of our city. Because water doesn't know a political boundary. And bike trails and all these things we're doing. And I know these neighbors just north of us walk their dogs in this area. They want quality of life. And they've seen the Madison area grow. And what are we going to do to rebuild and recharge that area? So I very much appreciated the emphasis. And full disclosure, I wanted to prove myself to longtime Fitchburg residents that I wasn't just going to listen to the new growth. I'm a new person. I don't understand the history of the city. So it really grounded me to understand. And as Mary told you, the deep history here, the pride, the goal of reclaiming this, and the elected leaders going to listen. And I think that is a good story of what we did here, because it takes that pressure from the neighborhoods to really kind of jack up elected leaders a little bit to say, hey, are you listening here? And we were able to, I'm proud of this, able to walk and chew gum in Fitchburg and be able to grow, but demonstrate we could reclaim the environment. We did some great Earth Day events here. Now you see, as you saw today, bicyclists coming from all over, people walking their dogs. So it's a good day today.
It's a good day today. How would you evaluate the process the city used to address the stormwater runoff issues?
Well, I think what we did is one thing that I'm really proud of Fitchburg, and this is where you got to have solid city staff. And this was at a time when, I don't want to get too political, but this was a time in the early 2010s when there was a lot of angst among public employees and things like that. And it wasn't because of their fault, but what was going on at the state level and this kind of stuff. But the professionalism that was demonstrated here and the facts, facts are stubborn things. And when you have the facts and you know what's going on and you know you have to do something, and the discharge, the metrics, I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. I got kind of a B in college biology, so I'm probably going to listen to the engineer like Rick. And I trusted Rick, and his boss at the time, Paul Woodard, came to us and said, we feel that we go in there, we get these DNR grants, which are all based on sound science, and the reporting that they had to do on this project was incredible. I felt that the investment for the city was the right thing to do. And I think it helped, too, that we had a very strong alder, Carol Poole, who's still a dear friend of mine, who's very active in city politics now as a member of the Planning Commission, literally lived across the street, still does, from Dunn's Marsh here. So she'd get up every morning, walk her dog, and see what was going on here. And if you got to know Carol at all, Rick certainly knows this with her work, and I'm sure Mary knows her well, she was very fiscally responsible. So if we were going to do this, we had to have the science, we had to all understand the facts, and we had to make sure that it wasn't going to blow the budget. And I think we accomplished all three.
Ah, tremendous. And so the lessons learned from the city's experience with Dunn's Marsh, what would you say they would be?
Oh, I think there's just generational lessons that are learned. I think it shows that the political process can work. Neighbors that care, neighbors that have a cause, that care, that come to city leaders and say, listen to us, we need you to do something. I think the other lesson from this was Fitchburg's commitment to the environment and its sustainability is second to none. And if anybody ever thinks that that isn't being upheld, come to Dunn's Marsh. You will see that Fitchburg has stuck true to that cause. I think the other lesson that learned here is it doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, whatever your parents' income is, you can come and enjoy this wonderful space. And it's a space where no matter your station in life, you can enjoy this beautiful scenery that you saw today and that my friends Mary and Rick told you a lot about, and really be part of our future of reclaiming and being prideful of the land that we live on. So I'm honored that you chose this topic, and thank you again for letting me be part of this.
Thank you, Shawn, for telling us the political aspects.
Sure.
And we also appreciate Mary for being able to tell us about how the neighborhood has been involved, and Rick with the engineering expertise that he has. So we thank our guests today for telling this important story of the restoration of Dunn's Marsh.